So last episode we were left hanging with Asta unlocking his powers from this really worn out grimoire that came flying towards him when the time was dire. And this week's episode really took an interesting route because the majority of the episode actually revolves around Yuno and Asta's backstory of how they became as they are today. And it's a very important piece of backstory as we'll learn, because the way they are in the present is nothing like how they were in the past. If anything, they had completely opposite positions in the past, which I find to be a very nice piece of, I guess, off-screen development in a sense. We don't really see Yuno's growth as he trains, but we learn how he changed his mindset to want to pursue this path, because at one point he did not seem to care about wanting to become the Wizard King like Asta did. Seeing Asta's spirit and the determination really causes Yuno to change entirely. This is of course seen as Yuno is ambushed by this grown-up who seemingly wanted the jewel around his neck for whatever reason, selling it most likely, I'd say. And yeah, after being kicked around for a while, Asta pretty much just comes in and takes over, you know. Now he's just a kid versus a grown-up, so it's not your typical shonen moment where even the kid will just absolutely curb stomp the bad guy. He does, however, cause him to leave the area after dropping the pendant jewel thingy. So seeing how Asta is just trying like that, Yuno realizes that maybe he too should set a goal like Asta has, because as I said at that point, he didn't really have a plan on becoming the Wizard King or anything, so to him it was pretty much open to anything. And seeing his best friend save him like that, he didn't really want to be in that position. He didn't want to be saved again and didn't want to cry again. And as we know, in the future, or the present should I say, Yuno is pretty closed in. I mean, he was closed in already in the past, but he still had a completely different personality. He was a lot more emotional than he is right now. He said he wasn't going to cry anymore, and he certainly seems to have kept to that promise for 10 whole years. In fact, it was hard for Asta to read Yuno, whether he was actually growing into a douchebag or if he was just keeping to himself, and luckily he did in fact not turn into Sasuke. That would have been like the worst outcome imaginable. Now the reason I say that is because a lot of people think this series is actually a Naruto clone, and well, fuck those guys. Anyway, one thing that I really want to talk about before I talk about anything else in this episode is the pacing of this season so far, because it's pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. A lot of people seem to be having problems with Asta's voice, which by the way was not a problem in this episode. I barely reacted to anything negative while I did do that in episode 1, so in regards to his voice, nothing to complain about really. But the pacing, let's just say that this worries me. Not in the sense of how much content this season is going to cover. I am pretty sure I know exactly how far in it is going to be going, but the pacing does create another problem, and that is interest. At the pace it's going right now, it's not going to create enough interest to anime onlys who are just tuning into the series. To some people maybe who have more patience, but then we have a lot of people who expect to get a good impact of an anime from 1 to 3 episodes. And I'll be honest with you guys, I fear that this one will fail to do just that, because the interesting parts that season 1 will cover don't come until maybe episode 6 or 7, I'd say, and that could create a pretty significant viewer abandonment. That would then in turn create another issue, which is that if season 1 doesn't get the views, there may not be a season 2, at least not for a while, and that's gonna suck for people who enjoy the series for what it is, me included. It's not the best series in the history of fiction, but it's still enjoyable. The comedy is pretty fucking good, that's for sure. Speaking of which, Sister or the Nun was definitely the best thing about this episode in my opinion. Asta's determination to make her his wife is just legendary. Rejection after rejection, and he still keeps going. What is his secret, I wonder? What's amazing about this part is not just that he's being persistent, but it brings this really interesting comedic value to it. You know, in many cases when the same thing keeps happening over and over again, you normally get tired out by it, but in this episode I didn't really feel like that. I felt like it was actually a good decision to have these repetitive and annoying moments with Asta just trying so hard to get the nun, and she's just straight up savage. She like, no. She says it with such a coldness to her voice too. You can just feel the rejection through your speakers or your earphones or whatever you're using. Next episode is probably going to be kicking things up a little, I think. As I said, I'm unsure if it'll get where it needs to be in that episode, but if they kick up the pacing from this point, I think it can still be saved, and I'm sure that it's possible. It simply depends on what Studio Period wants to do with this series. Anyway, I'll be ending this video here, so be sure to leave a comment down below, and Detroit, smash that like button if you enjoyed. Also, do subscribe if you haven't. This has been your favorite host, Perm, and I'll be seeing you next time.